What if you made $1,000, but your expenses were $1,400? How would you manage that $400 shortfall? In continuation of our series this month for Financial Literacy Month, we're talking about budget sense today. How do we manage that $400 shortfall with our financial coach that is our guest today, Michelle Velasquez, the founder of Virtuous Wealth Building? Let's dig in and learn how we can manage the income and expenses that we bring in each month with or without a shortfall. Hey, Michelle, how's it going?
Hi, Vaughn.
So, as a continuation into the Financial Literacy Month, I wanted to focus this session on budget sense. And particularly in these times with inflation and people are struggling financially, the last session we talked about our mindset and perspective of how we approach money. But this session, I wanted to get into some of the tactical aspects. What's the best way people can get started on budgeting?
I think that the best way that people can start with budgeting is really number one is getting clarity of your current situation. And what I mean by that is, really knowing the numbers. It's so important for you to know the numbers. There are so many times that I meet with clients and I'm like, how much money is coming in? And they're like, well, kind of around. So really having that exact figure. So getting clarity of like how much money is coming in. Another thing is really knowing your expenses, right? Like, where is my money going? And where do I want my money to go? So if you are like, hey, I feel like I don't have enough by the end of the week or by the end of your 2 weeks, whatever. At that point, reassess where did my money go and really get in the habit of looking at those transactions. I think we've become so digital and so everything is automated that
Right.
we've failed to go back to those statements, right?
Yeah.
Another way is really, as you're looking at those statements, look at your subscriptions. I have had clients that have had multiple subscriptions, 3, 4, up to 5 subscriptions, sometimes even duplicates, right? Hey, do I need this subscription? Do I still use it? Is it necessary? Right? Some of them are, and some people value different things. I have a client who values her health a lot, so she spends a lot of money on vitamins and things like that. And that's great. So that will stay on the budget. Right. But if you're looking at like, hey, I really have a gym membership for the past 3 years and I really haven't gone to the gym, then perhaps that's one of those that you want to get rid of. Right. And so that's just another way is to really list your debt, right?
Hmm.
Have a list of your debt. And I have a spreadsheet that I share with my clients that it's your debt, your minimum payment, your percentage, and then your total balance, right? I apply the that snowball method of like paying your smallest to largest.
Right.
When you have it on the screen or on paper, when you can actually see it, there's a power in that,
Yeah.
right? So looking at those numbers, even getting in the habit of just running your credit score every month, right? To see like, hey, how are you progressing? If you have a lower credit score, what's your goal? And that might be another way for you to be motivated, right? So really just get started. There's tons of templates online. There's apps. There's different ways that you can go about doing it. And it's individual to the person, right? Like I
Right.
have people that love the app. I personally still love Excel, right? So
Me
really
too.
know yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think it's so important, as you say, when you map everything out, because I love my Excel spreadsheet that I use for my monthly budget. And I found that like in the past, when I would fall short based on what I had allotted for my expenses for the month, there's always those what I call sneaky expenses, the things that are automatically debited out of your account. For example, those subscriptions that you sign up for maybe years ago, and
Mhm,
then, or maybe even like auto insurance type payments,
mhm.
whether it's homeowners or car insurance, those things are automatically debited out of one's account. And so then when you realize that you're not within your budget, it's those sneaky expenses that you didn't actually plan for because you don't actually see them. So I think it's great when you say to, even if you use an app, to first map it all out in writing. And so that
Mhm.
you can see like what's coming in, what's going out, and then go through your bank statements to look for those automated payments to include in that accounting or record
Mhm,
keeping of what's coming, what's going out, because those
mhm.
are the things definitely that can derail one's budget.
Right, and that's one of the most common, right? You call it the sneaky. Um, I like to I like to recommend to people to have an irregular expense account for those Costco runs, the pet emergency, if you have a pet, those big expenses that just come out of left field that really derail you. So if you get in the habit of opening a separate account, call it the irregular expense account. And even if you just start contributing $50, $20, whatever you can actually afford, it
Mhm.
starts to build up. So when you actually need it, it's there. I had a client who had a pet emergency and it was a $3,000 cost.
Wow.
And she said to me, I'm so happy that you encouraged me to open up this irregular expense. She said, it was when I had to pay out, I had the money in the account. She said, it was simply just an inconvenience,
Right.
right? And I was no longer stressed because I knew I had the money.
Right. Now, would you say that that irregular expense is similar to a cash reserve account or something different?
No, I would say something different,
Yeah.
most definitely.
Okay. So with the looking at one's income and expenses, what's coming in, what's going out, how would you say people can address ways to actually cut costs? Like if you look at all of your income, and let's say your income is $1,000 a month, but you find that all of your expenses going out are $1,400.
Mhm.
What do you do?
So the first thing is I want you to know why you're doing it. Why are you cutting the cost, right?
Mhm.
And having that clear, like, whoa, I'm barely making it, or I really need like why I really need to cut costs because I don't have an emergency fund, or I really need to cut costs because I want to buy a house. I really need to cut a cost because I want to take this vacation. Really having that target as to why you're cutting costs is huge because now you have something that motivates you to do it. So I think
Right.
that's the first thing. Um, I have, review and cut unnecessary expenses as we talked earlier. Another thing is price compare. We get in the habit of like, oh, I've had this insurance company for 10 years and my insurance agent sends me cookies during Christmas and whatever, right? We have these relationships that we're married to, it feels like we're married to at times. But the reality is that every year you should be, price comparing. I had a sorority sister that she asked me for a referral and I gave her a few referrals. And she came back and she was like, "Oh my God, Michelle, I was able to save $2,000 on my insurance." Right? She
Wow.
did the work. She made the phone calls. I had a client who had insurance, and she's like, "Oh no, I think I'm fine. I think the insurance is fine." I just don't think that she was willing to do the work
Right.
of making the calls her part to make these calls. But most definitely, it's something that when you start price comparing the cell phone, you know, the insurance, the internet, gas, like the gas app, Gas Buddy. My husband's always like, "Look at Gas Buddy." When I'm like, "Oh my God, we gotta, put gas." There's different ways that you can cut those costs if you just take that extra second or that extra minute to prepare, right?
Yeah.
Cutting back on eating out and maybe making it fun. Like for us, Friday nights is like a pizza family night. It's like a little
Mhm.
tradition that we have. But there's times that I'm like, oh, do I really want to spend $40, $50 on pizza night? Right. So
Right.
I'll go to Aldi, I'll pick up these little to-do pizzas. I make it like an activity with the kids. I
Yeah.
make it fun. But I don't when we budget, I don't want people to feel restrictive. But there's also different ways to be creative. Another way is energy efficient. Like my husband's a contractor. We're big believers in paying a little bit up front in the beginning with like your
Right.
your systems, but like as simply as changing the light bulbs, just connecting things. The thermometer is a big thing for us in our home. You can set it a certain time, like in the winter, right?
Mhm.
Like, hey, an hour before I get there, I want it to start getting warm and toasty in my house, but it doesn't need to be at a high degree throughout the day.
Right.
There's just little ways that we can save throughout.
Yeah. When you mentioned about unnecessary costs, and I think sometimes people's perspective about budgeting, it stems from what they see as necessary versus unnecessary.
Mm,
And when I've done like workshops around finances, I always use the analogy of needs, wants, and desires.
mhm.
And a lot of times people confuse their needs with their wants. What's your thoughts about how people can actually identify what's unnecessary versus what is really necessary, backing into ways to actually cut costs? Because that's something people struggle with a lot.
Absolutely. And I think some of the common ones we all know, right? Like what's necessary, obviously, shelter, your rent, your mortgage, your
Hmm.
food, your utilities, your gas, transportation, clothes to a limited, right? We're not going to be shopping every week. But then what happens to the remainder of the money is you really need to know what you value. I
Hmm.
mentioned a client earlier, she really values health. So for her to spend on her vitamins and her shakes is a big thing. So that is something that she values, and that's something that is a need for her,
Right.
right? For other people. So the needs are really something that is an individual need, based on on things that you actually value.
Right. And then even with that though, digging in more, for example, on transportation, when you look at you have to have transportation, that need, a need could be, well, you get a Chevrolet or a Honda. A want may be that you want a Lexus or a Benz. And so
Mhm.
the need is transportation, but the want would be the brand that you end up selecting, which can really impact one's budget. Because if you get something that you're pre-approved for, that you qualify for within the Chevrolet, Nissan, Honda, your payment could be, I don't know, $200-$300 versus if you were to try to get a Range Rover or a Benz, where you're talking about over $1,000.
Right. And that's why I always tell my clients, and I always say it's so important for you to know when you're saving, what you're saving for,
Hmm.
or what motivates you, right? Because that's exactly it, right? The transportation, I could be like, well, I really need a car and I need to be in a Lexus. No, no, I don't need to be in a Lexus, right? But some people value that, like, and so
Right.
the question is, we have to dig deeper as to why. And I actually met a mom yesterday at the ice cream shop, and she's a big believer in showing her wealth, and so she said to me, I feel, and I asked her why do you feel
Hmm.
that you need to always be dressed up the way you dress, or have the diamonds that you have, like, I really was digging deep.
Right. Yeah.
That's beyond. I said, is it because you feel ugly and you might want to? It makes you feel beautiful. Is it because you lack confidence and you're like, hey, this, by looking this way, people compliment me and it makes me, boosts my confidence. So I said,
Hmm.
you don't have to tell me. I told her at the ice cream shop, but I really want you to ask yourself, because she's struggling. And I said, I want you
Right.
to ask yourself and dig deeper into this question. Is I always like to talk about the feeling. How does it make
Hmm.
you feel?
That's good. What other faulty perspectives do you come across with people as it relates to, because you do financial coaching? What are some of the other things that we should be aware of around how we think about budgeting and finance?
So I think one of the big ones, and especially when I coach couples, is uh, feeling restrictive. Like, oh, if I budget, I can't ever spend on coffee, or I can never, do this. And that's really not the case. The case is that if you budget, you actually make sure that you have enough money for things that you want and that you value. So I think
Mhm.
that's a big one. Another thing is that we don't realize that there's things that trigger us, or
Mhm.
events that happen, or that some of our spending is based on emotion, and it goes back to how are you feeling in that moment. So it's not just about numbers, and I think that's something definitely that people have, like, well, I follow the numbers and I'm looking at the plan. Well, it's failing because, number one, you don't know what you value, you don't know what triggers you. Some people are just not healed and not ready, right? Like,
Mhm.
depending on your past, or spending habits that your parents had, or things like that. And so, yeah, there are just different factors.
Right. So going back to like a person, because I find that a lot of people with budgeting, they say that they just don't make enough. So with the $1,000 coming in and 1,400, I think it said $1,400 going out, how do they attack that type of position of their expenses are more than their income?
So I'm gonna be super honest. I've been coaching now 3-4 years, and in the time, I have probably had one person that really is barely making it. Okay, so that's a mindset, like, oh, I'm barely the reality is that they're spending on things that they don't value. And number one on the list for people is eating out and entertainment.
Hmm.
And so for that one person and for those individuals that are really paycheck to paycheck and are rarely making it, my advice to them is number one, either we need to switch a job, get ask for an increase, add in a side hustle. It's not just about reducing things from our budget in our life. It's
Yeah.
also about how can we add and bring in other income and really taking control of the little income that you are making.
Right. When I used to be a financial planner and I had, I found the same thing that most often when people said that they don't know where the money's going or they don't have enough, there's only one person that I recall, and it was a family member, where when I tried to help them with their finances, I was like, good Lord, there's nothing I can do for you. You need to get another job and make more money, because she was doing everything that she could. And
Mhm.
it literally was not because she wasn't being a good steward or because she was overspending. She needed to literally find another job and make more money.
Yeah. And sometimes we stop ourselves. And so sometimes I'm like, get out of your own way. Like,
Mhm.
because we stop ourselves from that increase or that blessing, that abundance that really is coming our way. Because sometimes we're afraid or we're
Mhm.
comfortable, right? And I always tell people, you're not going to grow when you're comfortable. You're going to grow when you're uncomfortable.
Right. That's good. What are some things so we've talked about the short-term cost savings, but when we budget, we also need to make sure that we're planning for the long term. So long term could be things such as retirement, but I try to tell people to plan for whether it's a car that your car is not going to last forever, or maybe there's a goal for a house. What are some long-term cost-saving measures that people can employ?
So for long term, as I talk about long term, I was thinking like sometimes we have to invest a little bit more upfront on things. And I know you said retirement, but before we get there, I was thinking of like daily stuff. And some of the things that I had on my list was simple as like the high efficiency appliances and things that we don't
Those are
think
good. Yeah.
and just things that we don't think about, like maintaining and servicing, like number one, our teeth. Dumb. But I can't tell you how many times I go to the dentist and I'm paying $300-$400 for my kids' teeth. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
They brush their teeth every day. Because I grew up like, and I make sure that I do it. And the dentist is like, well, sometimes it's a hereditary thing or genetic thing or whatever. But like, really investing and taking those extra minutes on brushing your teeth, flossing, things that later in life are going to be costly, right? Our health, our vitamins. My mom the other day came to my house and she's like, oh my God, you have all these vitamins on your counter, right? And she's like, you pay so much money because at the top of my vitamins says the like $50 or I buy the Thorn supplements, right? And so I was like, Mom, yes, I paid $50 for that bottle, but I'm like, that's two co-pays with a doctor that eventually I'm not going to need, right? The proper shoes that we wear. Like
Mhm.
I have chronic plantar fasciitis, so it's horrible, but I invest in my feet. And so these are little things that people might look at like petty or small, but at the end of the day, like it's a long-term savings. And health is like one of the number one reasons why people break financially in the
Yeah.
future, right?
Those are awesome and I'm glad you went there, because actually these are things that I talk about within my family, and I don't always talk about it with other people when I've done coaching, but it's true. Like I take a lot of at least 10 vitamins a day. Um, some in the morning, some in the afternoon, at night, but it goes back to, I'm thinking long term of trying to make sure that I take care of my health. I need to
Mhm.
start working out and doing more consistently and working out. But even like I've told my son about, like with his family regarding brushing their teeth, taking care of their teeth, like even with the pacifier when they were young, not to
Mhm.
suck on the pacifier because you don't want to pay for braces later, thus expenses. So those are great ways to save money for the long term, because
Yes.
you're not necessarily cutting costs, scrimping, but you're doing things now that will save you money in the long run. I think that's because most people who file bankruptcy.
Other long-term ways that we can cut costs that sometimes we don't think about or we don't talk about is investing in technology, right? Like,
Mhm.
especially as a business owner, with like the chat GPT nowadays, I like to coach my clients that, hey, we need to be ahead of the game, right? If you're a consultant or whatever business that you have and you are not using technology to your advantage, you're like 10 steps behind.
Hmm.
Right. And so I think it's so important for us to invest in technology. Now, I don't think it's 100% reliable. They still
Right.
need the human touch. Right. So I'm
Yeah.
not saying, because when you look at some of these things, that you still need to, your input needs to be there as well. But that's definitely something that I tell people to do. Another thing is to learn new things. Like we talked about, like, how do we bring an extra income? What can we
Right.
do? Right. Learning how to do and self-perform things. And I know, and I believe you're also an investor in real estate. So knowing how to fix certain things that are small, and even if you don't know how to fix it, you at least knowing the time that it takes,
Yeah.
right? So you're not being taken advantage of when somebody else comes to perform the job. So I think that those are some other two ways that we can cut costs in the long term. But in regarding to saving for long term, I think I'm really big on having that emergency cushion. And I'm really big on, as a parent, the mother of four, on taking care of myself first. And even though that sounds selfish, and that sounds selfish, I think even just in my culture, in the Latina community, like kids come first, the kids, the kids, the kids. But in our culture, I think that parents for the longest was always the children, and
Mm.
really failed to take care of themselves and their health. And, they paid money for us to go to college and that. And at the end of the day, when it comes to retirement, they don't have anything. And at
Right.
that point, kids are married, kids have their own kids have, their own mortgages. And so then it just becomes this expectation, this cultural expectation of like, hey, we're supposed to take care of our parents because they feel they've taken care of us.
Right. Those are good tips. One of the things I think when you talk about self-care, it still goes back to cost savings and then also savings, because when you take care of oneself, we've talked about the vitamins, our health, our teeth, for in your instance, like your feet, that saves costs for you individually, but also in the long run, it enhances your ability from an expense perspective. Your expenses are reduced for your family as a whole. So you're focusing on self individually, but it impacts your entire family in the
Mm-hmm.
long term.
Yep.
So, what are some quick tips? You mentioned it previously, but let's dig into ways about how people can actually increase their income.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the first thing is I want you to just, as we're answering this question, I want you to just think about for yourself, right? I don't want you to compare yourself, Evonne and myself, to Susie, to Mary, to anyone else in this. I want you to take the time to really sit down and reflect. What have you already done?
Mm.
What are you already good at? And take time to update that resume, right? I think sometimes we undervalue ourselves. We don't take enough credit for things that we do. And I'll just give you like a small example. So I was in law enforcement prior to becoming a financial coach. I was never a manager to anyone specifically with by title, right?
Mhm.
But I did manage a law enforcement group of youth 60 plus. I did manage 12 advisors. So technically, I have managing experience, right?
Right.
But people don't think about all those like extra service and volunteers and things that you do at church. So take the time to really don't minimize your skills. So that's the first thing. Continue to build relationships. Those relationships will open up doors, and those doors for those opportunities, right?
Mhm.
I recently got a contract and somebody asked me, well, how did you land that contract? Like, what did you do? And I said, honestly, it was just all about relationship building. They knew me, they knew how I operated. And so that gave me the ability, and that helped me to do that, right? They knew my skill set. Um, don't be afraid. Another tip is don't be afraid to ask for more money in your current position. Don't be afraid to do a little research and say, hey, what is somebody, let's say a title of a program manager, right? Like, what is a program manager making now in a mid-sized company, whatever. And so compare it to other companies that are comparable to the one you're working at, and really look at it and say, oh my God, like, hey, I'm actually being underpaid. Right. And
Mhm.
have this conversation. Hey, I've done research, and maybe in your midterm review, or really highlight the things that you've done really well for that year, right? And say, hey, I've done all of this year. We've been super successful. Here are the points, have everything documented. I've also done research on my title, and other companies are paying X percentage. Is that something that is in our budget? Right. And then put the ball in their court. And if you cannot get that promotion, that extra money, always look into other options like additional time off, additional perhaps stocks. Pick up a side hustle on things that I always tell people, don't pick a side hustle on something that you don't like or you don't enjoy,
Right.
right? Because you're not going to be serving the person well. So really know what causes you joy. What are some things that you're really good at? And sometimes what are some things that other people tell you that you're really good at? Right? Like you might not see it, but what are some things that people come to you for? And that can also give you some tips on certain things that you do. But there are so many little online ways. If you're looking for virtual ways, I'm big on Fiverr, on thumbnail. I think it's called Thumbback, where they do like construction. Like my husband's a GC and like little side jobs and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, you know, pet. I know this one sounds small, but like pet walking and pet grooming is huge. Uh,
Yeah.
my husband and I just came from a 9-figure conference, and they said, anybody making over $5 million, please stand up. And it was one couple, and everybody's like, well, what business is this? Everybody wanted to know. And they had a dog mobile grooming business. And so, there's just so many ways to make money, and just know that you are skilled. And if you really have desire to make money, you're going to make it.
Yeah. One of the things that when you talk about making, there's something I wanted to say about making income. Oh, when you say do something that you actually like, because I find that when people are struggling financially, there's a tendency to be reactive. You react, so you go find a part-time job. I remember when I was younger, I was in grad school and I had like 3 part-time jobs. I was doing security. I was the worst security guard. I only lasted 3 weeks, but I was doing telemarketing, and I don't even remember what the other job was. But I was in school full time, in grad school, working on my master's. I was a single parent trying to make ends meet, and so I was just reactive, trying to find hustles wherever I could to make money to pay my bills. And so as I've gotten older, one thing I've told people, I haven't necessarily said do something you like, but think for the long term. Try to get that job that aligns with your skill set, like you just said, but also that can enhance whatever it is, like enhance your marketability, whatever it is that you're wanting to do career wise or for the long term. Because one, you're getting that part-time job or part-time hustle to help ease your expenses or help your budget, but it's also helping you in the long term for any other roles or other jobs that you get in the future, that everything is tying together and you're not just, you know, getting a job as a security guard because you need the money. And I was in school to be a CPA, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
no correlation whatsoever. So I love those tips, because it's very important not to be reactive. And everything we're talking about relates to being proactive and planning ahead.
Yeah. And because people feel it, right? Like
Yeah.
if you go to like a coffee shop and somebody, a server is like resentful or not attentive, you can tell the difference between that person that's attentive, the Uber driver that's really nice. And
Yeah.
then in turn, you want to tip better because you're like, oh, I had a great experience. Like they were great. Versus somebody that just was like, you didn't speak to you the whole time or whatever. And so we can feel it on the other end. And we're not being served well.
Right, right. What would be your closing thoughts about Budget Sense? And then also, how can people contact you related to your services?
So regarding budget senses, number one, if you don't budget, try it,
Mm,
right? Like just try it and try different ways, right? Try it on paper. If it's working out great, try an app. If you don't like that app, try another app, right? So
yeah,
that's for those that don't budget. For those of you that do budget, keep budgeting, right? But continue to have clarity of those long-term goals. And if you feel like you're budgeting and you're still not accomplishing what you want to accomplish, then let's chat where we can have a conversation to see, hey, what are some things that derailing you? But also know that I always tell people you can look at numbers all day, but really pray about it,
yeah,
and ask God, like, is this where you want me to be? Is this where I should be? And pray about your business. Like Evonne,
yeah.
like I recently started praying more about like my marketing, my audience, like, Lord, allow that the women that need to hear me some way, allow to bring me those relationships, those partnerships that we need. And then yeah, and that's really, I think those are the two that I would like to encourage people is that if you haven't tried it, try it. If you feel like something's missing, there's so many resources out there and so many of us
Yeah.
that are willing to help you. And people can reach out to me. My website is www uh, vwbcoaching.com. And then I do have a link tree, and I'm not sure if Yvonne, you can share that one
Yeah, I'll
later.
put it in the description. Yeah.
Because there I have all the events that are coming up, and it's Financial Literacy Month. So I'm actually having a class, that 7 steps to leave your 9 to 5 tomorrow morning.
Mm.
And then I'm having another one for first responders and real estate, because I'm also a real estate investor.
Awesome. Yes, all your information I will include in the description so that people can link up with you if they'd like. This has been very informative and so necessary. So many people, regardless of income bracket, always have questions regarding their finances, whether it's budgeting, investing, saving. So this has been very fruitful. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.